Hello and welcome to my video for my procedural modelling and rendering unit. For this unit I wanted to make a digital asset that I can and will use for years, and something I've always wanted to make and spend time on is a detailed procedural Ivy generator that can be art directed in specific ways and customizable over time. The first thing is to find reference. Going back home I live in the countryside, so there's plenty of reference for Ivy. I went outside and took some photos. I also laid some of the leaves out on a large white sheet of paper, and I tried to make the lighting as even as possible, and took images of each leaf for texturing. After taking the photos, I brought them into Photoshop, and I cut each of them out. I also created a normal map and a roughness map for each of them, so I can follow a full PBR workflow in Houdini. Now, let's move on to Houdini. Let's get started on how to use the node. First I'm going to plug in a box for simplicity's sake, but you can use any model that you want on this Ivy generator. Next you're going to click on the generator, and then you can see a bunch of settings that I've put together for ease of use. First we're going to want to go to the Ivy cluster. We can turn this on, but basically what this setting does is allow us to control the variation of how bumpy the Ivy is going to be later on. But yeah, we're going to change the settings to make it look as close as we want to the variation, so we can change the minimum of each of these bumps and the maximum. I'm going to keep it around this scale, but we can also put it on. Next we're going to go into the node, and we can go over to this Ivy drawer, and we can put the blue flag on so we can draw a line of where we exactly want it to be. So there we go, we got our Ivy line, and we can go back out. Okay, so once we're happy with that line, we can, I'm going to set the grow down to here, but we can turn the visualization back off, and look, you see the bumps just to add a bit of variation to the surface even though it's not changing the original model. But over here in the Ivy amount we can set the grow to be bigger and bigger, and the higher this number is, the more of the surface is going to be covered in Ivy. We can also increase and decrease the amount of leaves on the Ivy stem through this node here. Going over to scale, we can really art direct how big we want the leaves, and we can add some variation with the minimum value and maximum value. I'm going to keep it around here. We also have some creative control on the stem. If we look over at it, we can, let me just go into this mode here. Zooming over to it, we can see here that we can get rid or keep the original line that we drew, and it merges it together. But I'm going to keep it because it looks better and it looks like a proper plant. But we can also change the stem radius, so we can make it bigger or smaller. So we can put the leaves back on it, and one thing which is really good is the Ivy age. What I did is I added some settings which allowed you to change the age, and it replaces certain parts of the Ivy with dead and dying leaves. So it allows you to really direct how you want your Ivy to look. I normally like to keep it around this mark, but you can also change the offset if you don't like the way it's looking, and you can also change the scale. That's really how to use it. We can plug in any shape, let's say this rubber toy, and we can go back to this look here. We can turn on the cluster and do the whole art direction and how much bump variation it has, and then we can do the line. I'm going to do it like this, and look, and then over here you can look and see it all together. I mean, but without the clustering, so I can turn it off, you can just see it seems a lot more flatter and a lot more vacuum packed to the surface, but with it, it gives it a bit more bump and a bit more shape to the Ivy, and makes it have some variations stick out. The first thing that I wanted to get right wasn't the growth of the Ivy, it was the way the leaves worked. Over here I have a simple leaf geometry coloured 3 different colours, so I can easily see which one's which. Over here I created a node group of basically it brings in the points, and it assigns each point a random number, well, a number from 0 to 2, and over here in this attribute wrangle it assigns each leaf a number from 0 to 2, and over here in the copy to points it looks at the piece attribute variant and it puts each leaf on the corresponding number created over here in the attribute adjust. And over here in the attribute randomize, it randomizes the rotation. In the next version, I introduced a attribute adjust, which allowed me to change each of the point scales from big to small, and this gets used all the way until the final version, so it's very useful in picking the scale of the leaves. First of all, I wanted to figure out how to get the organic looking growth of ivy in Houdini. So first, I bring in the mesh and I turn it into a VDB to make sure that the whole of the imported mesh is one solid object that doesn't have any holes in it. Then I remesh it, which allows it to have hundreds of little points that the ivy will hopefully grow from. I use this draw curve and this polywire to create a 3D cube that can be used as a bounding object in this group to tell Houdini where I want the ivy to start from. And then over here I have another group telling Houdini where I want that ivy to grow. So I select the entire mesh because I want to be able to grow that ivy over the entire object. Then I found this node called the find shortest path. This node is crucial in creating that ivy look. The find shortest path node in Houdini uses a mathematical equation called Dijkstra's algorithm. This basically looks at every single point on the mesh, every single vector, and it calculates the length / weight of every edge. So then the computer can look at every single point and it can figure out the shortest path from one point to the other, allowing it to weigh out which path will be better suited to get from one point to another. And if you look here, it figures out where from these original points is the quickest and most optimized path to the entire mesh. I use this node called the carve node to be able to scrub through the whole thing, looking from the first U, which is the first point, over to the second U, which is the very last point. And this allows me to pick how stretched out I want the ivy to be. Over here I incorporated a way to change the amount of dead areas in the ivy. I wrote this node here, which basically looks at the points, it creates noise, and it looks at a way to customize the noise. But what it does is, it looks at the certain threshold of the noise, and a certain amount of points that are past this threshold, dictated by this switch here, it keeps them or deletes them from the group. This gets blasted out, so you see here, I can control how many points are still there, and then how many parts would be dead. Over here, I brought this over to the copy to points. This part is the living part. Over here, I bring that over. Then I do another one, but I take away it by minus 0.1, and I delete that part, which adds a little bit of overlap to it. Then I can do that again, and then I do that over here, and I do it by even more. This allows me to have certain groups for areas that are just completely gone. So there you go, you got the dead areas, you got the dying areas, then you have the living areas. Then you can incorporate this all together. Each of these boxes are unique leaves. So in the living areas, they have 4 unique leaf textures. The dying, you have 4. And in the dead leaves, you have 4 unique leaves. I had so much fun working on this ivy generator. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video.